Reem. Welcome to this episode of On the Road to Zion. We are back from our break. Take a little bit of a summer break, because here in Arizona, it is quite hot, and we just needed to lay low for a little bit. And everybody is out traveling. Everybody's in Israel. We got Ireland and Scotland. Little preview. But anyways, we are here with Margarita Lyadova, who is the host of the People Jew Want to Know podcast. She has been at this even before October 7th. If you can imagine that there is somebody out there that was actually interested in learning the stories of Jewish people before it was really that financially beneficial to one. Margarita is one of those people, which is one of the reasons why I gravitated to her pretty early on. She is definitely a real one. I'm excited to talk to her. I think she's got a very interesting story. I hope you find the same. So Margarita, please tell us a little bit about yourself. More so than anything, tell us your story.
Thanks so much for having me, Zach. It's such an honor to be here. And might I just add, I've yet to make a dime from my podcast. For anyone listening, podcasting is not a business for money, just to be very clear. So I'm Margarita. I host People Jew Want to Know podcast, where I interview remarkable Jewish people every week. But before we talk about that, I want to walk you through my life story because it ties very nicely into why I started this podcast. So first and foremost, I'm a Jewish refugee from Ukraine. I came to America when I was 9 years old with my family from Donetsk, Ukraine, as a Jewish refugee. And before we immigrated, I was a child performer in Ukraine, like think little Ukrainian Hannah Montana. I did voice for commercials, I had an album, I had a producer, a studio, and even a chauffeur. My first cell phone was at 6 years old. I was a 6-year-old with a cell phone. Yes?
Wait a minute. Time out. I'm going to let you continue, but what?
Yeah.
What? All right. I'm trying to wrap my head around it. You had a chauffeur. It was one thing after another. And I was like, but you had a chauffeur?
But a chauffeur.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Keep going.
And that's the real stamp of approval. My childhood was very different from most kids because I was treated as an adult and as an employee and talent from a very early age. It kind of predisposed me to do voice acting and being in front of the mic and in front of an audience from when I was a young child. And then when I came to America with my family, all of that ended abruptly because we came as Jewish refugees. We didn't know English. And, at 9 years old, I went from being a celebrity to being on food stamps and on free and reduced lunch and living in Section 8 housing. And it was a rude awakening into the immigrant lifestyle and being what's considered a second-class citizen. But, my family's philosophy was always that we're moving to a country where everything is possible. In Ukraine, sure, things were possible to us, but the system is rigged. You always have to bribe people in Ukraine. You have to know somebody to know somebody. In America, you have the American dream where everything is possible. And so my family instilled in me the belief that if you work hard enough, you can do whatever it is that you want to do. And in this country, nothing will get in your way. So my upbringing in America is pretty standard. I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I went to middle school, high school, and college there for undergrad. I studied business, and I got a tech job out of school, and that's how I ended up in New York. In New York, I was very involved in Jewish life. I was that person that knew all the Jewish events in the city and was connected to about everybody in Manhattan. And I then pursued grad school at Penn, where I studied behavioral science, which is the study of why people behave irrationally. And then I moved back to the city when I was done with school. Now, when I came back, I wanted to be involved with Jewish life again, but I wanted to do something that blended my passion for Jewish life with the artistic or more creative side of how I grew up. As sappy as it sounds, I wanted to heal my inner child. I feel like I didn't have a creative outlet when it was such a big part of my life, but I wanted to do something cool and trendy and valuable that didn't feel stupid and shallow. So I thought, there wasn't a cool, trendy Jewish podcast out there, and I started doing research on what was available there. And I found that Jewish podcasts were really tailored to three main areas. Number one, they were focused on current affairs or Israel. Number two, they were focused towards the Orthodox market. And number three, they were focused to older women. Those were kind of the trends of Jewish podcasts pre-October 7th. So I thought to myself, what a great opportunity to enter the market with something that feels young and cool and hip. And this was very much at the time of things coming out like Locks Club, which was Jewish dating made trendy, or, Jewish events like Friday Tables or Shabbat Club, which were Jewish events that felt, exclusive and elite. I wanted to do that, but in podcasting, and also offer something that brought people together, not only in an educational forum, but also to learn about remarkable individuals that were in our community, that are in the arts, that are in politics, that are in religion. And that's what people do want to know is.
Amazing. All right, so we got to go back to the beginning, which is you are a child star in Ukraine. And usually when you think about refugees, you think about war-torn countries, you think about people in destitute situations, and they're leaving to go somewhere better. But you guys went from what sounds like to me is from something great to something worse. So walk me through kind of the context of the situation and the context of this decision to leave Ukraine.
So I think the key here is how you measure great and worse,
Okay.
right? Ukraine in the early 90s, right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I would consider a developing country. For
Sure.
example, I always share that I grew up going to school without toilets. Like, we had holes in the ground. And if you needed toilet paper, you brought your own toilet paper from home because your school did not provide that. Your school also did not provide heat and air conditioning throughout the year. If you needed heat and air conditioning, all the parents gathered together and they pooled money to make sure that the school was heated and cooled in the right seasons. So in that sense, it's not that we went from great to worse. We went from fine to great, but it's the difference of lifestyle.
Mm.
Whereas before in Ukraine, we were considered upper middle class. That does not translate to upper middle class in America because the currency is very different. So
Yeah.
it's really a lifestyle change, but that doesn't mean that overall we were better staying in Ukraine. And I want to touch on your comment around refugees. Yes, we came as Jewish refugees, but we did not come in a time of war. In fact, most of the Eastern European refugees that came to America were really in the first Aliyah and second Aliyah wave. We came in 2006, which was much later than you typically see Jewish refugees come to the United States. We were like the tail end of it. It is my grandparents that experienced true, overt anti-Semitism. By the time that I was growing up, the anti-Semitism was more covert. It wasn't like Jews were prohibited from certain jobs or academic institutions like in the time of my grandparents. It was more like, oh, I'm going to the doctor, he's a Jew, kind of anti-Semitism.
Got it.
So that's really the distinction I want to call out.
Yeah, but you did have a chauffeur, so I don't know. I'm just kidding. So you were talking about how or I guess actually my first question would be then is how did you end up in Minneapolis? Because so often, like, you have most immigrant communities, especially from like former Soviet Union, would end up in New York City. There's like Little Odessa. I think it's Brighton Beach, if I'm not mistaken. And so like why Minneapolis as opposed to kind of a place where maybe there was a larger population, or maybe there was a large population, we don't know about it.
There is a pretty sizable Russian-speaking Jewish population in Minneapolis. I would say it's maybe fifth place after like New York, LA, Chicago, and
Mm,
so forth. The reason we ended up in Minneapolis is because my grandparents had already immigrated to America and they came to Minnesota. So we thought
mm,
that it would be better to move somewhere where we already had family.
fair enough.
I do
Um,
wonder what it would have
oh.
been like if my parents came to New York or Chicago instead.
No, I think that like so often when it comes to the kind of the feel of the village, and I can speak to it not necessarily certainly not as an immigrant or anything of the sort, but just merely as somebody that does not have family in the current state that I live in. And interestingly enough, like, my wife and I have found a community of people that either don't have family here, or maybe they have kind of like loose family, and so like a lot of us actually kind of like come together and we kind of like make up, we like to like call ourselves like the kibbutz, because ultimately like what you just have to find is just that small little community of people. And I do think that just having family is so important. Was there a reason then, if your grandparents had already moved to the United States, why didn't your parents move when they immigrated?
It takes time. My grandparents got the clearance faster than my parents did. And my grandparents had lived in Minnesota for 6 additional years before my dad and my uncle were able to immigrate. We To be honest with you, I want to put it into context. My parents had me when they were 22 and 24. When I was 9 years old, which is when we moved, they would have been in their early 30s. They had
Mhm.
a great life. They had their group of friends in Ukraine. They were having a great time. They were not itching to immigrate to America. So my grandparents went there first to kind of see what it was like.
Yeah.
And when they realized, that you could live a really good life here, they sent an invitation to my dad to say, we want to reunify our family. We
Yeah.
want to bring our relatives to America as well under the same asylum seeking status. And my dad had applied for us on a whim. And it was one of those things that was like, if you get it, great. And if you don't, you don't. The one call out I want to mention that's relevant now more than ever because we have so many asylum seekers attempting to enter the US is there's a one fundamental rule about asylum. If you seek asylum into the United States and you are granted asylum and you decline, you are banned for the rest of time from entering the US even as a tourist. On the guise that if you're an asylum seeker, you need to be serious about leaving your
Wow.
country and we are taking your request seriously. So if you decline, that means things were not so bad for you in your home country, were they? So when
Mm.
we got approved to immigrate to America, there was really no going back because we did not want to ban ourselves from entering America ever again.
Wow. That's wild. So then, dang, I did not know that. I'm gonna come back to asylum seekers because it's obviously such a crazy issue right now. But I want to keep going because one of the things I asked you early on was because I had Lauren Kagan on here at an earlier episode, and she is a Soviet Jew. Her parents immigrated after the fall of the Soviet Union. She considers herself a Soviet Jew, but when we were talking about this in preparation for this, you had mentioned that um, you're not a Soviet Jew, that you are a Ukrainian Jew. And I would love for you to maybe explain that distinction, especially since like Ukraine was the Soviet Union, and why you feel different, why Ukrainian Jews feel different in general, where and when that distinction came in. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that so that everybody knows that there is a difference.
I would compare Ukraine and Russia kind of like Spain and Portugal, right? They're similar, but they're also clearly distinct. And after the fall of Soviet Union, which is when I was growing up, Ukraine started quickly developing its own national identity, which it's still fighting for today. We're talking about a different language, differences in mentality, sometimes differences in cuisine. And sure, there's a lot of overlap, but it's very clear that Ukrainians are different from Russians, even in their mindset and how they
Hmm.
perceive the world. I grew up in Donetsk, Ukraine, which is eastern Ukraine, that has now been occupied by Russia for what, 10 years?
Yeah.
The original conflict started in 2013 in my hometown, Donetsk. There
Wow.
was a lot of warfare that occurred before the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine in 2022. And it is true that many ethnically Russian people lived in Donetsk. And it's also true that many ethnic Ukrainians lived in Donetsk before the invasion. And at the time, it didn't really matter because people were just living their lives. Then when Russia invaded, it was kind of like a moral crisis for these people of like, who do we want to be part of? And it is also true that some people living in Donetsk decided that they want to be part of Russia, and that is their right. So today, if you live in Donetsk, Ukraine, a lot of those people hold Russian passports.
Hmm.
And the interesting thing about Donetsk is it's kind of like in ruins now. For example, if you look on Google Maps at the city, the latest satellite photo of Donetsk, Ukraine is from 2011. It's almost like it's been erased from history, which is insane. When Russia occupied Donetsk, they won militarily pretty quickly on. And at that point, Ukraine made a decision that said, okay, if you guys are now part of Russia, that's your right, but we will not be providing plumbing and water to the citizens of this place. Russia can provide you plumbing and water and utilities. And they shut them off.
Hmm.
Russia said, worry not. We will provide you all these basic utilities. And they never did. So today, if you are living in Donetsk, Ukraine turns on running water for a couple of hours every day. There's also curfew for the people who live in Donetsk. And like the toilets, for example, you have to flush with a bottle of water. It is really caveman times there. But please make no mistake if you're listening to this, everybody who is there has chosen that. They have
Mm.
chosen to live there. They have chosen to be occupied by Russia. And if they wanted to, they could have moved to independent Ukraine. They could have made the moral choice to be part of Ukraine. They did not make that choice. They get to face the consequences.
And what about wow, I don't think, obviously the conflict doesn't get far and away enough media coverage. They have to run the 50th piece on Gaza because, God forbid somebody go into Donetsk and cover this as well. But specifically in the Jewish context, where do you see the difference? Like, why don't you identify as a Soviet Jew? Or why don't your parents identify as Soviet Jews? Or do they? And is there a difference between those two identity groups?
I think my grandparents would identify as Soviet Jews. My parents would identify as Ukrainian Jews, and so would I. And I think when you live through the fall of something like the Soviet Union and you see the tragedy that the Soviet Union brought, you will not willingly want to identify with that. And so, if given the opportunity, of course, my parents would be like, why would I identify with the Soviet Union, which brought on destruction, communism, and hatred to the world? I feel much more proud to say I'm from independent Ukraine.
And so when you were growing up, right? So you're 9 years old and you have a Jewish life. You imagine that you remember at least a good chunk of your Jewish life in Ukraine, and then you have a Jewish life here in America. And so what was it like? What was the biggest differences? Like, did you feel like you grew up in a Jewish household? Did you feel like you grew up living a Jewish life in Ukraine and in America?
I've never thought about this question, quite honestly. I actually think my Jewish life did not really begin until I moved to America. In Ukraine, we lived a very secular life. My parents always taught me that you're Jewish and you are ethnically different from other people in this country, that your people come from Israel, and you are living outside of Israel as a Jew. That
Mm.
I understood. But as a child, I did not see the differences in a tangible way because we didn't belong to a synagogue. We didn't practice any holidays. The only thing we did do was we did not eat pork, and that's
Mm.
about it. So I only became aware that I am Jewish and that reflects in a different way of life when I came to America, because as Jewish refugees, a lot of the aid we received came from the Jewish community. I went to Jewish sleepaway camps. After school programming, the JCC. That's when I really started seeing like, oh, this is a community that has a different way of life.
So I'm curious because you are on the record and we've had this conversation about Jewish organizations. And so I'm curious what your perspective is, and if you could maybe go into a little bit more, because I think it's a good jumping off point that because you benefited so much from Jewish organizations, and now over the last couple of years, you have been quite critical of them. And so what I'm wondering is, I'm assuming that you live in the nuance somewhere. And so Jewish organizations, you could be very grateful for what they did, and also you can be objectively critical about um, how they have been. Can you just dive in a little bit more into your experience as someone who benefited but is also now critical of them?
Having benefited from Jewish organizations is the reason I am so involved in the Jewish community now, because I feel it is my obligation to give back to that community. My critique of Jewish organizations has nothing to do with the amazing work they do to help Jewish refugees come to America and the scholarships that they give. My whole childhood, I am indebted to Jewish Life for sponsoring me through every single camp, through numerous scholarships, both growing up and in high school. This all I'm so grateful for, and I have no critique against. My critique of Jewish organizations is more so, for example, organizations like the ADL that claim to combat anti-Semitism. When you are seeing the best financial performance for your organization when anti-Semitism is at an all-time high, something is misaligned here. If your incentives are correctly aligned and your goals and metrics are correctly aligned, you should not be having your best performance ever when you are supposedly doing the worst job at the goal you claim to reach, right? That does not seem
That's a fair
unfounded
point.
or unreasonable to me. My other critique of Jewish organizations, and this is not something that plopped into my head, like I spoke to a lot of experts before I formed this opinion, it was really that the people in these Jewish organizations do not actually know how to solve these problems. Period.
Mm.
End of story. Okay, we see that anti-Semitism is on the rise. What do we do? Apparently, we pay $45,000 to Lizzie Savetsky. That's apparently what we do to solve that issue.
Is that her speaker's fee?
I don't know. Maybe it's more than $45,000 now. I'm just guessing. I'm
More? Oh my God.
speculating.
Whew.
Bring her on the pod and ask her. My point is that these organizations cannot, in good conscience, look me in the eyes and tell me that we use some data-driven, intelligent approach that clearly shows us that this will drive meaningful reduction of anti-Semitism. And that is my critique. And, you talk about this a lot, that these Jewish activists and influencers have built careers off of the honorariums they've charged to go and speak at different events. To me, honestly, I don't know that I can, in good faith, charge double digits to go speak to a community.
Yeah, I just got somebody reached out to me to go speak, actually, like to be at a virtual panel like in January, and she had mentioned that it's Hillel that's sponsoring it along with Stand With Us, and she asked me like, how much do I charge? And I was like, well, my wife is a Hillel professional. I'm a former Hillel professional. Like, it's with Hillel, like, then I'm not going to charge anything. Like, I don't even know what I would charge to begin with, but I'm not going to charge you anything because like that's just not what we should be doing. I'm curious then, because we could go into like each individual organization. Where do you find the good ones, I guess, as somebody who really benefited? Because, I didn't benefit from like the Federation in terms of like actual real assistance the way that you did. What are some of the organizations out there that you maybe benefited from that are still doing a great job? Maybe the ones that you weren't aware of that you've now seen as a part of as a member of the community and, as an activist, that you think are doing well? And what are some that maybe like you also like participated in that you're like disappointed and sad in the direction that they have started to head?
I think any grassroots work I'm a fan of.
Okay.
Anything that's local and small and helps real people that you can name is doing good work. I'll give you an example of something that that really had an impact on my life. Alexander Muss High School in Israel is a program for high school students to learn about Jewish history. I went almost entirely on scholarship to this program funded by the Federation of Minneapolis. And that program changed my life. It equipped me with the foundation of knowledge that I could build off of to be an educated Zionist today. That's an example of a well done. The ROI on that scholarship was tremendous. If Alexander Muss High School knew the impact that they had on me, they would give themselves a big old pat on the back. Okay? So
That's wonderful. That is a fantastic. That is a fantastic example. That is a fantastic example. So in terms of your then overall, I guess, identity, or like how you formed your Jewish identity growing up in the Midwest, which doesn't really have that large of a Jewish community to begin with, but clearly you were very, very involved in the community itself. And also, I've heard that, especially a lot of Jews who grew up in the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, really were quite separated from just the religiosity, if you would want to call it. And so where did you learn to be Jewish? And what does that mean in from your perspective as a Ukrainian Jew?
my Jewish life has always shown itself through more of a cultural identity than a religious one. Even today, I'm not, a majorly practicing Jew. I don't keep kosher. I definitely don't keep Shabbat. This ethnic national identity of what being Jewish is what I have internalized so strongly. If you think about the history of the Soviet Union, Jews who lived in the Soviet Union, their passport didn't say Russian or Ukrainian or Soviet. Their passport said Jew, because the Soviet Union intimately understood that Jewish people are ethnically and nationally distinct. For how much they misunderstood about Jewish life, they understood this one thing very well. And it is only in America that I realize that Jews themselves don't view themselves as a distinct ethnic identity, but rather a religion. And there was a time a few years ago that Trump wanted, I think in Trump's first presidency, he wanted to change the census where when you fill out your ethnicity, you can put Jewish so that Jews don't have to put like Caucasian and Middle Eastern. And there was a lot of controversy around this choice because on one hand, it perhaps is more accurate. On the other hand, it threatens Jews by allowing them to self-disclose, and then perhaps they may experience some kind of racism or discrimination against it. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of major Jewish organizations, including the ADL, put out statements to say, like, whatever you do, do not support this, and the whole thing was dropped. And so on the census today, you cannot put ethnicity Jewish. It's still like Caucasian and Middle Eastern, whatever you think fits you best. I actually was in huge support of this because part of what I don't understand about American Jewish life is why we're not positioning ourselves as a nationality first, as an ethnicity first, because if we did, I think the conversation around Israel becomes much easier. Instead, many Jews see themselves as just practicing a religion, which I think is a huge disservice to the rich history of our community.
I mean, I can certainly answer that. I think there's a lot of different reasons. I would probably say like the main one is that it's interesting, by the way, that so many Jews, and I imagine so many Jews who were against it were like liberal reform Jews. And yet for many of those types of liberal Jews, they literally identify themselves as an ethnic Jew, that they're like, oh, I'm still Jewish because of his ethnicity, even though I don't literally do anything. So that's just like a quick caveat. I would say that probably the biggest reason, though, why that is because they're ultimately, it's two things: terrified that if they are seen in any way, shape, or form as distinct from the larger population, that they are going to be rounded up like in Nazi Germany. Because American Jews, unfortunately, I would say, see their Jewish identity through through the lens of the Holocaust, because that is what every Jew, whether you go to Hebrew school or you don't, or bar bat mitzvah, whatever it is, even if you do nothing, at some point you will most likely have Holocaust education, even in your secular education, because we as Jews fought for that piece to it. Obviously, there's a lot to be discussed about the impacts of that, and then frankly, like how it was ineffective. But ultimately, if you're a super secular ethnic Jew, the last thing that you want is to be seen and as different, and certainly on like an official record. And then the other piece to it is that if you are a Jew who does not grow up in a major Jewish area, and I experienced this for the first time when I was working at the University of Texas Hillel at Austin, which is that if you are somebody who is surrounded by practicing Christians, and you see the way that they identify as Christian, and they tell you that as a Christian, like they're just like the next iteration of Judaism, and that Jesus was a Jew and everything of the sort. So all of a sudden, the representation of what does it mean to be a member of a religion is someone who practices. So you're not, and belief, and more even specifically is belief. So if you're a Christian, that you have to believe that Jesus is your Lord and Savior and is the Messiah. And if you don't, then like you literally cannot be a Christian. And then the measurement of what does it mean to be a good Christian is based upon your attendance to church. It's on, if you're a Catholic, it's about going to Mass and also doing, like Lent and all of those types of things. And so if you're a Jew who's growing up in like a pretty Christian area, and you're seeing your friends like going to church on Sundays, and they're going to Bible study on Tuesdays, and they're part of like Young Life in high school and everything, and you see that, you're like, okay, that's what it means to be a member of a religion. And because you think that Judaism is a religion, you say, well, I don't go to shul, right? I don't do Torah. I don't even know what the Torah is. I don't celebrate the holidays. I don't do Shabbat. I still eat everything. And so all of a sudden, your relationship with Judaism as a whole is merely through this Christian religious observance lens. And so, of course, you say to yourself, well, I guess I'm not Jewish if I don't observe the religion. And then, of course, you have the other piece to it, the other side of that coin, when we tried to welcome more of these people, more Jews into the fold, that said, no, like your mom is Jewish, so therefore you're Jewish. But then we didn't attach any of the religiosity. And that's how you get a lot of these like as a Jews that are like, oh, well, I'm Jewish, so like I have a right to speak on all of this.
Zach, hear me when I say this with my full chest, okay? this dynamic and this philosophy that Jews are just a religion and not a distinct nation is a product of, one, a lack of understanding of who we are as a people, and two, internalized anti-Semitism. I will die on this hill.
It's actually, so it goes even more, and I don't know how this relates to both of those things, because what I learned was that the reform movement, and when it started, not trying to dog on, reform Jews here. I'm speaking specifically to reform movement that started in the in the 19th century and beforehand, around the time of the Enlightenment, that basically it was their response or their ability to mesh the Enlightenment with Judaism. That the reform movement, the foundation of it is, we are going to strip the national identity away from what does it mean to be Jewish, and in reality, we are only going to make it a religious, just a practice of religion, and that, because Reform Judaism has become the dominant form of Judaism in America, that has flourished. And so people find that the only way to be Jewish is through these very simple things. That's why they keep asking the questions around, well, if someone says, like, are you Jewish? Someone will always say, well, I don't keep kosher. I don't keep Shabbat. I don't go to synagogue. I have never had a bar bat mitzvah. And so that piece to it is just those four things will always come up when having this conversation. And at no point will they ever talk about, and sometimes they'll mention, their mom is Jewish, or they'll say, like, I'm half Jewish or whatever it is, which kind of like speaks to it. But none of them will ever speak to, like, the ethics of what does it mean to be Jewish. And I don't mean Jewish, like tikkun olam Jewish values. I mean actual, like, ethics of what does it mean to live just a regular Jewish life on a day-to-day basis. And we as American Jews did not do that. We did not educate our Jewish children correctly.
I'll also mention another hot take I have around patrilineal Jews. Because I so deeply believe that Jews are a nationality and an ethnicity, I completely accept patrilineal Jews as
100%. 100%. And I'm going to take advantage of the opportunity here, because you are the one who brought it up, not me. I'm going to reiterate my position that there is nothing explicit in the Torah. Nothing. You can tell me all about, Eliezer and all of the people that when the Jews came back and they said, get rid of your foreign wives, and you can point to this and you can point to that. If it was so important, it would be there. I will tell you this. There are literally instructions on how tall the tabernacle can be. It says it can't be more than like 6 cubic feet high, all right? It describes the exact foods that you're not allowed to eat in detail about chewing your cud. You can have fish, but only if it has scale. So you're telling me that the Torah has these very explicit instructions, and yet at no point in this entire thing delivered to us by the divine does it ever say, by the way, you're only a Jew if your mom is Jewish. That's just my personal opinion.
Amen to that. Okay, what else you got for me?
Going back to your story, because I want to go back to your story, which is, so now you moved to New York City and you are a part of it. So can you describe, like, as somebody, because so many people that I talk to, especially, either have always been in New York City, or they have or in a major Jewish population, or they have never been in a Jewish population. And you and I have both experienced it when we're in both. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit more about what does it mean to have an experience as a Jew in a place that does not have a large Jewish population, and one clearly like New York City. And what is that feeling that you got in both places? What were you missing? What were you so grateful for in both? I'd just love to hear a little bit more about your experience.
Growing up, I had a huge amount of non-Jewish friends, and today, at the fine age of 28, I have maybe like 10 non-Jewish friends. I grew up with a lot of non-Jews and doing athletics. I had a lot of non-Jewish friends growing up. I never felt that they misunderstood me, and it never came up. But now that I'm an adult and I'm more educated and I'm more stuck in my stance of support of Jewish life and support of Israel, this is kind of a non-starter issue for me, which means that if you're a non-Jew that does not support Israel, I cannot be friends with you. This is the difference, I think. And perhaps that is, judgmental or closed-minded. Perhaps that is, a big deal breaker, but that is my deal breaker. I don't impose it on anyone else. And this is what allows me to live through this highly traumatic time post October 7th, when a bunch of the non-Jewish people that I was connected to felt the need to message me that they're disappointed in me for supporting an apartheid and a genocide, when I am disappointed in them that they support rape and murder of Jews on October 7th.
I'm curious because, that one, your story is very common amongst Jews at this point. Because you said that you don't keep kosher, you said that you don't keep Shabbos, but you obviously go to a lot of Shabbat dinners and everything, and you are obviously a part of it. Um, was there a reason why you decided, like, as somebody that is clearly extremely proud of being Jewish, and there is a wealth of accessibility to live a more Jewish life in a place like New York City, that you have chosen that it's just not a big deal for you in terms of how you feel as a proud Jew and how you feel like how you are living a Jewish life?
I guess I'll start by saying that my life has changed post October 7th, where I do engage with Jewish life more than I did before. There's almost no Shabbat in a given year that I'm not at a Jewish event or at a Jewish space for Shabbat dinner. This is very important to me. This is something that I've chosen anew because of what I've seen. I will also say that because I have a Jewish podcast, it's kind of like two birds with one stone for me to go to Jewish events, because you never know who you'll meet. It's always good to get the word out about my podcast. So having it allows me an excuse to always be at a Jewish event. In the past, it wasn't this way because I had more non-Jewish friends, so we could go to the bar, we could go for dinner. Now that my circle has shrunk a little bit, the place where I spend time with my Jewish friends is by way of Jewish events.
And what about also things just like keeping kosher or keeping Shabbos? Because obviously, like, again, if you live in a place like Minneapolis, you live in a place like, Denver or Austin, you have like 2 Jewish restaurants as opposed to many Jewish, you have also, or kosher restaurants as opposed to like exceptional kosher restaurants in New York City. Is there a reason why you have settled on yourself that says, you know what, like, I don't need to eat kosher, I don't need to keep Shabbos to be a proud Jew?
I have a good answer for you. Genuinely, what I'll say is this. To me, the kosher restrictions that were written were a way to ensure that the Jewish people survive in a time when there's a lot of unhealthy food, bacterian food, no good methods of keeping food cool and well stored. Now we do not live in that kind of society, which means, in my opinion, that I can enjoy those foods, whereas before I could not. I'm not saying this is a good thing or I would recommend it to others. This is my justification for better or for worse. Regarding Shabbat, it's kind of the same logic. I love the concept of disconnecting and resting one day for 25 hours. Does that mean I can't use the blender to meet? No, because I am not well rested for not using the blender or not turning on the lights. Like, that to me is stretching the intent with which something was written.
And no, look, and I want to be clear that, like, the reason I asked is because I think we're at this time that a lot of people are trying to actually move back toward a more traditional sense of Judaism, especially a lot of people who, the two of us have talked about this a lot. I personally have spoken about, like, my journey, like moving away from the more liberal side of things, the more reform side of things. And a lot of people are making very large jumps. People who are like hyper progressive, people who were hyper reform, or who weren't secular, or, were completely secular, and they're making big jumps. And the reason I wanted to ask you that question is because I want to make sure that people understand that, like, you don't have to do those things. Is that something that, are you still like breaking halakha? Sure. Like, there's nothing to be done about the law. The law is the law. But in terms of your identity as a proud Jew, there are some things that are more important and less important, in my personal opinion. And like you said, right, the intent around Shabbos is to rest and to take time for God. And just because you decide to use the blender doesn't mean that you're not resting. For a lot of people, literally turning on the television helps them rest. There's a lot of things that you can do, like, for instance, not being on social media during Shabbos. That is actually something that's like within that intent, even if you still wanted to use your phone. And I think I just wanted to make sure that other people knew that there are people out there that consider themselves proudly Jewish that also approach this from the same place.
I do think it's a lot more important to be educated on why the Torah says certain things and what the Torah says than to actually do those things sometimes. And one of the shortcomings I see of Jewish children being raised today is they lack the Jewish education. I believe every Jewish person should take a class on studying the Talmud and the Torah. I don't believe they should become observant Jews. I believe they should learn where this text originates from, why it is interpreted the way it's interpreted, and make their own conclusions.
Yeah. So then I'll guess I'll ask you, if you were to kind of maybe, be on a committee of people that was reforming Jewish education right now and Jewish communal work. I mean, where does it start that helps us prevent from a lot of Jews out there that basically learned about Tikkun Olam and learned about these Jewish values and Jewish ethics that ultimately have led them to be antagonistic towards Judaism and antagonistic towards Israel and to the Jewish people? Where do you find that balance where it's like, because the Orthodox would say, well, it's all part of the same, right? You have to keep kosher. It's all, if you break this halakha, then you might as well break all the halakha. And obviously neither of us believe that. And so for you, where does that education start that makes you feel like this is the seed that can help sprout the tree?
I think we need a total reform in curriculum, and I think text study is crucial to that. I'll give you an example. So I was a Hebrew school teacher sub for many years, and my students were 4th and 5th graders who did not want to be at Hebrew school. It was very apparent. So I made it a mission to make my class so interesting that they would want to participate in programming. And I had to get really creative. One book I recommend for anybody, not just educators, is a book by Michael Eisenberg called, I think it's called something like The Tree of Life and Prosperity, Principles of Business According to the Torah.
Oh.
And it takes every Torah portion in the book of Exodus, and it tells us what that portion says about doing business. For example, when it talks about Noah's Ark, it explains that Noah was the world's first entrepreneur. He invented the plow, and the plow quickly revolutionized the society that he was living in and boosted the economy. And as people grew in their wealth and their quality of life, they started getting greedy and screwing each other over. And that's ultimately why the flood happened. And so Noah, seeing how his invention led to the demise of society, felt that he was responsible for what occurred. And he turned incredibly depressed. It's like Nobel, who invented dynamite and, was distraught that this invention caused so much pain and death. Now, after the flood happened, Noah, who was always an entrepreneur at heart, then invented the fermentation process to create wine. And out of his own grief, he drank himself to death. And that is the Torah portion we study when his son finds him, right, all distraught and naked and drunk and sad. And that is the grief that he feels for the damage and destruction that his inventions have caused that he couldn't stop because he was always meant to be an entrepreneur, and he's not responsible for how his inventions are used. And suddenly, when you tell that story is interesting and relatable to my students.
Yeah.
That's cool, okay?
That is cool,
So if Hebrew school is taught that way, with lessons we can understand, it's a lot more captivating and interesting. And when I taught about the Jews, the Exodus from Egypt, right, when they crossed the Red Sea, I played them a video of the movie Prince of Egypt, and I had them point out the inaccuracies in the cartoon as compared to what the Torah actually said about Exodus. So suddenly, that's interesting, right? It's a game. And I really genuinely believe our Jewish education needs reform so that it is appealing and interesting and cool to children. And that can be done. It's not that hard.
No, it's not. And I think it just comes down to people who care enough to want to make it better, and I think that there's also a sense of like the organizations need to put resources behind it, and then also people need to put funding behind those resources, and they need to be a part of that process. As we wrap up, I want to kind of go back to something that I mentioned at the beginning, which is the asylum seekers and everything, because I think that it very much relates to the education piece, which is that we have this thing of what we experienced And so often with Jews, they can say, oh, well, like my grandparents were, were Holocaust survivors. They were refugees. I'm refugee. So like, therefore I must experience all refugees. And that's a Jewish value, right? Like Jews don't reject refugees. We were refugees. I want to, I guess, finish this where is again, in this kind of gam v'gam, this and also that type of thing for you, where do you find yourself in that place as a refugee yourself, as a former refugee yourself? And also, you're looking at these different refugees that are, whether they're from Gaza or they're just like, asylum seekers from Latin America. And, you have found that you're not like, oh, well, my Jewish values tell me that I have to be for open borders because I was an asylum seeker once. Can you walk through that and where your Jewish values actually point you maybe in a different type of direction?
So I want to call out that I was a legal asylum seeker. My family came here legally, a process that took years, right, to fulfill. And we are so grateful for the opportunity this country has given us. I support legal immigration and legal asylum seeking. I also support that if somebody in this country is here illegally and they want to contribute to this country meaningfully, they find a way to be legalized if that's what's best for our nation. If they're criminals, that's a different story, but not all illegal immigrants are criminals. And many illegal immigrants have been here for decades and they contribute to our economy in a profound way. And I don't think they should be ushered out as unceremoniously as the Trump administration has done to these people, treating them like criminals when, they came 50 years ago, and at this point, they're more American than the guy who came a year ago. I think there's nuance here in a gray area. People should be treated with dignity, even when they have broken the law. With that said, I don't know why immigration has become such a contested issue. It should not be some controversial thing or a partisan issue to be like, I don't support anybody ever just entering our country and doing hell knows what. Like, that's not a hot take. I don't know why it has become so politicized in our country. To me, like, as I just walked you through, there's clear nuance and common sense applied to the issue of immigration. Unfortunately, the Trump administration has taken a huge, blanket approach. Everybody out, back to where you came from, when that puts thousands of people in danger. And frankly, states like California have had to find ways to replace those jobs because, believe it or not, the illegal immigrant community actually did a lot for the state of California. So there has to be a middle ground. There has to be some common sense. But yeah, as an immigrant and as an asylum seeker, no, I do not support you walking across the border and just being like, okay, now give me benefits and Section 8 housing and food stamps. That's not the intent of immigration. And I don't think that has much to do with Jewish values at all. It's more just like how we live as a society and what is practical.
That makes sense. And so I guess then my last question would be is because so often you're clearly not somebody who is like just this avid, Trumper MAGA type, which I think a lot of, obviously a lot of Jews who are proudly Zionists also get associated with being, super MAGA, and for good reason, because a lot of Jews, frankly, like have ended up, kind of like shifting into that and into that direction. And so, for you, what would you say to the Jew who's out there who is in contention that says like, or I guess to quickly also like caveat, which is you're also somebody who's not like anti-Trump. You're like, hey, like we got to figure out both ways. And I think there are a lot of Jews out there that are really finding that internal conflict. They're clearly not as confident in their position, in their nuance as you are. And so I think just the last thing I would say is that like as someone with this incredible experience and this journey that you've been on, and you are so confident in being in the gray and being in the nuance as a proud Jew, as a proud Zionist that is also not, on the extreme wing of any side, can you just give some advice to them on how to be more confident in living in the gray?
Okay. Well, first thing I want to say is even when you live in the gray, when it comes to, for example, our presidential election, I had to make a choice, right? If you're voting in the election, you're going to have to make a choice no matter what. And it's a choice that you don't like for whatever reason, because in this past election, we weren't really given great choices. And I don't think anyone will disagree with me on that. There are a few fundamental principles that I live by when it comes to politics. Number one, I believe that everybody has their own vote, which means I don't have to vote on your interests. I get to vote on my interests. And if you want somebody to be there to represent your interests in our government, you get up and you show up to the polls, right? I also believe in principle number 2, which is if you didn't vote, you don't get to complain. If you want to be involved in politics, you have to show up to the polls. And number 3, I also believe that what happens at the local politics level can sometimes be a lot more instrumental in your day-to-day life than who you vote for president. So with those 3 principles in mind, even when I have to make a difficult choice, a choice that I'm not happy with, a choice that I know will hurt, for example, my friends. If I vote, I vote against their interests, right? I vote in a way that might hurt them. I go to sleep at night knowing that the intent behind my choices was the right one and was the best one, even when I don't get to control the outcome and how it plays out.
Of like the story of Noah's Ark and the plow.
Actually, good point.
Full circle moment, ladies and gentlemen. That's thank you so much. I think that's a beautiful moment to end on. Margarita, I just want to say thank you so much. Not only for obviously coming on to the podcast, but for doing the work. There are a lot of people out there, and we are. I hate saying that we're in a fight, or that like we're like that we're in the fight, as podcasters, as content creators. We're in a different fight. And I've come to the conclusion that it's okay to say that like I'm in the fight, because there are a lot of people who are doing different things and there are plenty of soldiers in Gaza that can't do what we do. And that's not to say that like what I'm doing is the same as putting my life on the line in Gaza, because that is absurd. Anybody who ever tries to tell you so, you should shun them and just put a pie in their face. But nonetheless,
Can I just
they're.
add one thing?
Oh yeah, of course.
I want to add that you asked me about asylum seekers. And one critique I have of our Western world, especially the parts of the Western world that are so in support of the Palestinian cause for self-determination, much of that world, and especially the Arab diaspora, does not allow Gazans to seek asylum, because they feel that if Gazans leave, nobody will be there to hold down the fort and resist the occupation. They are allowing people to deal with starvation, war, rubble, and danger out of principle. And so I call on all of those nations to accept asylum seekers and open their borders to all the Gazans that are suffering as a result of the conflict.
I totally agree. The Gazan children that were denied their medical visas or something like that, like I personally don't feel bad about it, because in my personal opinion, I think that you have Turkey that was far closer, and Qatar, two countries that are far more responsible for the suffering in Gaza than America is. And so if they care so deeply about their Arab and Muslim brothers and sisters and their health and safety and welfare, they are free to help them themselves. We are under no obligation to do so. It's very simple. All right, so I'll wrap back up and say thank you, Margarita, for being here, not only on the pod, for doing what you do. It's incredible stuff. And, I just want to say that, I don't think that we're the same as soldiers fighting in Gaza, but we are in the fight. And it's okay that we're in the fight in the way that we are, because this is a front. Everybody has agreed, even, military experts and foreign policy experts have said that the information warfare and the front on information is a legitimate one. And I'm not putting my life on the line, but we are spending our time. And I just want to say thank you for doing what you do, because you spend so much time on it. And please make sure that I hope that the people that you interview also know that like where they are spending their time is valuable and important. And I want to be out there that says, if you are not following people you want to know, you should go and do that, because you're supporting somebody who's in the fight. You're supporting the people that she goes out and talks to, because they're in the fight as well. And for you, it's okay if you are not. It's okay if you are passive in that way around, liking and following and sharing. Go find something else. Volunteer, donate, go and be a substitute teacher at a Hebrew school teacher, help reform the Jewish education, something else that makes you feel like you're in the fight in what works for you. And in the meantime, people do want to know. You can find her on Instagram. You can find her on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. You can find her on TikTok. You can find her probably everywhere. YouTube? Are you on YouTube? Not on
Not
YouTube.
yet.
We're not on YouTube. But yes, you can go and find, like, subscribe, follow, rate 5 stars. Both me and Margarita. Margarita, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Everyone, you enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I hope that you have a meaningful life and as you walk down the road to Zion yourself.
Have a meaningful life, everyone.
I'm going to cut that. You're not making fun of me on my own podcast. That's the name. It's like the good night and good luck right there.